call the AT-AT an AT-AT, but you call the AT-ST an AT-ST. Why do you make that differentiation? Why don't you follow what George wanted?
To be clear, 9 times out of 10, I call it a chicken walker. So when
a chicken walker?
Because when I first saw them, I thought, it's walking around like a chicken. And so I just grew up calling them chicken walkers. Me and my friends, that's what we called them, until we learned they were AT-STs. And I guess you call it an AT-ST because that sounds better than an AT.
It sounds like you're getting a little spastic.
Right.
Yeah. Or you got to sneeze, you're about to say AT, and you're about to sneeze.
Right.
I like, though, that chicken walker sounds like a very specific job for a kid in Kansas. Like, what's Jimmy growing up to be? Oh, he gonna be a chicken walker.
He's a chicken walker.
He's a chicken walker right there. He's gonna fight. But you know what? He's fighting the rebels too, so that's good. He's got 2 jobs. He's both a chicken walker and he's fighting the rebels. So that's what you got. But can I tell you one of the reasons why calling it an AT-AT drives me nuts is that I think every other creator in the world is like, you had a brilliant sounding name in AT-AT. Yeah. Like it sounds badass. It is badass. And then why are you making me say AT-AT? It sounds ridiculous.
Yeah. It is an acronym. You know that.
No. Yeah. Well, okay. Now you probably know what the acronym is.
An all-terrain armored transport.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, successfully married man right here. Sorry, ladies, he's off the market. He knows what AT-AT stands for. What is AT-ST?
I can't remember. It's like a single transport, I think it was. I think
that would make sense. That would make sense. It's a single transport.
A single transport. There we go. Well, anyway, hi everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show ostensibly about talking about AT-AT, but also about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Guigar, editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive, and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. And Dave, we've got a special guest.
It's indeed a special guest. It's America's heartthrob, America's internet heartthrob. Jake Parker of MrJakeParker.com and a resident AT-AT expert. Again, I'm so sorry that he's off the dating market to the rest of the world, but he was snapped up early and probably before she knew that he knew the definition of AT-AT.
It's true.
Is that true? Well, when did your wife find out about your predilection? Predilection is a terrible sounding word. When did she find out about your love of Star Wars? How far into the relationship was it?
It was early because. Actually, one thing that drew me to her was she had a Han Solo figure hanging from her rearview mirror, and so I was like, "Yeah, that's interesting. You know, I like Star Wars." And she's like, "Yeah, Star Wars is cool." I didn't know then that she just thought it was cool. She wasn't like into it.
Right? Yeah. It just happened to have been something that she got at Spencer's gift.
Yeah,
like the week
something like that.
She's not super into it. But in the back of your mind, you're like, hey now, Han Solo on the rearview mirror.
You know, that's actually a great topic, Dave. Are you the same person that your wife married?
Well, now that's an interesting question. Am I the same man that my wife married? Yes, ultimately, I think that I am a child.
Dave, you had a great tweet that stuck with me, and tweets don't usually stick with me, but you said you've been married for 15 years or something like that, but in that time you've had 3 marriages.
I said that?
Yeah, I believe that was one of your things.
I mean, I want to give all due credit to me as a genius. Yes, I'm sure I said that, but I have no memory of that.
That was either inspirational or confessional. I'm not sure which.
Yeah, exactly. I'm on wife number 3 in my first marriage.
It brought up a good point and made me think, like, yeah, we were newlyweds, and that transition into like being parents of young children, and that's transitioned now into being parents of older children. This is my marriage, and I'm like, it has shifted and it has changed, and I feel like even though it's the same person, it's a different relationship over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's a much deeper understanding and I think also a bigger willingness to forgive small slights or mistakes or faults than at the beginning of a relationship. Just because you both know that you're doing your darndest, you know, to and like. But anyway, oh god, that got real sweet there towards the end there. So thanks, Jake. Anyway, I wanted this actually transitions lovely into the first topic that I wanted to bring up with you, Jake. So first of all, let me ask you, because I like to ask people this: how do you self-describe your career when you're at a party? Ooh. How do you tell other people what you do?
It is so funny you bring that up, because I was just having this conversation with some friends of mine, some other creative friends, and it depends on the situation. So to some people, I'll say I'm a cartoonist. Other people I'll say, I illustrate children's books. Other people I'll say, I'm currently working on a startup. So it depends on like the person I'm talking to, if I know a little bit about them and how much explaining I feel like I want to do that night, you know? Mm-hmm. So,
right.
I used to say I was an artist, and that just doesn't that's such a broad term. It doesn't mean anything anymore. So I've gotten a lot more specific. So that's kind of how I describe it. But to actually answer your question for the sake of this podcast, which I'm sure you don't really care how I answer people.
No, I do.
No, but I would describe myself as an illustrator, cartoonist, writer. So I do those.
No, but you've never. Come on now, you've never actually said those words.
No.
You've never been. You've never
those
been.
Words have never escaped your lips.
I know that's a fib right there, Jake. Like when you're at a cocktail party, and I'm a normal person. You have no idea what my background is. Go, hi, I'm Steve. I'm from down the street. What do you do? And you say, I'm a writer, cartoonist, illustrator, friend.
No.
What did you say? What was that description again?
Raconteur, man about town.
The raconteur, gadabout. Yeah.
No, I usually what I'll say is I'm an illustrator.
Okay. Yeah. And you know what's funny? I would actually, if I had to pick a term for you, that's what I would say too, because your illustration skills are so uniquely wonderful that's. Not that you are not great at 15 other things, but that's where I would place you. Yeah. So anyway, good. I'm glad we fit my definition of you, Jake. This is perfect.
Dave, how do
I describe Jake? No, how do I introduce myself? I always lead with cartoonist, and then they say of what, and I say comic strips. The second follow-up statement is like a comic strips like you would see in a newspaper, but the entire thing is online. And they go, really? How do you make a living from that? And then that becomes a 10-minute conversation. Right. And I can gauge within 1 second that they do not care how I make my living. And so I bail out quickly. But every once in a while, there's a creative person usually, that does actually care a lot about how I do it. So anyway, so that is that. How do you describe, Brad? How do you self-describe?
I'm a little bit more in line with Jake. I gauge the situation and my mood and how much I want to talk at that moment. And in that decision making, I disgust myself because I spent what's it been now? I 18 years on the internet, and then of course doing comics and cartoons before that. So let's call it over 20 years I've spent trying to get to the point of who is an Asian American woman and what was that?
I am so sorry, guys. My phone just started playing. We will edit that out, Brad. I'm so I was trying desperately to power down my phone because I realized it was making noises, and I somehow turned on NPR. I'm so sorry.
I thought you were watching YouTube videos.
Jeez, I'm so sorry.
That's no problem. I can pick it up and edit it from there. That's not a problem.
I'm so sorry, Brad. That's never happened, Jake. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brad. Go ahead and pick up from a place that for you.
This has never happened before, Jake.
Jake, I promise. This is my performance is normally better, Jake.
Like, yeah, you're upset about dropping the china in front of the company. This has never happened.
I really did become like my grandmother. Oh, Jake, I'm so sorry. Oh, Jake.
Did you do the
Oh,
thing
Jake,
where
I
you
hope you can.
fumbled through your phone and bobbled it between your hands?
Well, no, but I literally did have my fingers come up towards my mouth and touch each other, like, oh, Jake.
Oh my God! Now I'm not going to edit this out. This is too good. Screw it.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, that's funny. Well, Jake, you saw me at my most grandmotherly. Oh no.
Well, no, but anyway, like I was saying, I disgust myself because I spent so much time trying to gain that mantle of being a cartoonist. It was my one goal in life. For as long as I can remember, it's the only thing I wanted. And I've gotten to a point where I can truly, without exaggeration or without, stretching the truth, I can say that I'm a cartoonist. And I rarely ever do because same as like what you guys are saying, then you've got to sit there and explain it. And so it's like, I really don't, 9 chances out of 10, I'd rather not be in the conversation in the first place. So I just say I'm a graphic artist and let it go at that.
Right. The other thing you have to gauge is how, do they really want to know, or is it just small talk?
Right.
Right. And that's why I say, like, you can gauge within 4 words of things coming out of your mouth. You're like, oh, they're turning away. They don't care.
This is a dead end.
But it's so rare, I think, for people to interact with cartoonists because there's 480 NBA players in the country right now, National Basketball Association players. And there are probably a similar amount of professional cartoonists, if not less, in the United States. And so the odds of someone meeting an actual working professional cartoonist are about the same as meeting an NBA player. So every once in a while, you do come across someone who's like, what do you do? How do you do this? And that's a fun cocktail conversation. And then you can bring out the raconteur and gad about self-descriptions that Jake likes to throw around.
But to complicate it even more is there's what you do, but then there's also what you make money at, which might be 2 different things, right?
Oh, that's true. Yeah. For me, it's blood donations and plasma, which have been my big, I got to tell you, we haven't done a podcast about that enough, but supplementing your income with plasma sale, it's incredible. Get in on this market, people. It's kicking up. But no, Jake, you're 100% right. Like the things that you love that are self-defining, that you're like, this week I was a cartoonist or an illustrator because I did this, is not exactly what I paid for my mortgage this month because I did that. Like sometimes those are very different things. Right. You're right.
I mean, my income is completely diversified. Nothing, and you guys have talked about this before, and so it's like, well, 10% of my income comes from this. Another 30% actually comes from cartooning, but then there's another, other 30%, which is illustration. And then, there could be another thing, investments that you've made, or whether you have a rental property or something like that. So do you say, I'm a slumlord, like what are you?
Yeah.
And at some point you kind of, you have to decide like what you want to talk about and what you actually like self-identify as, I guess.
Right. And, it's funny you should mention the rental property, because I know one cartoonist who I think we all know, but it'll go nameless, who makes a considerable side income on the market. And I've never heard him mention that at all in his income. But but you're not wrong, is that he's figured out a balance for him that works for him, that he can do cartooning 90% of the time, but the market, the other 10% of the time, pays for the 90%, So yeah, that's 100% true. But speaking of income, because this is a good transition to one topic that I wanted to bring up with both of you today, because I'm kind of fascinated about it. So we have all reached what I think we could describe as a modicum of success in our career, and thank God for it. Like, we're all doing great. We're all food's on the table. Everyone's healthy. We're all living and doing what we want to do. But I think a fascinating thing to talk about would be, what is each of our deepest, darkest fears for our career? Not for the current project, not for the thing we're working on right now, but for the overarching career. What is your deepest, darkest fear? Brad, do you want to go first on that
Well,
one?
yeah, because I just lived through it again. And I do at the end of every month. My deepest, darkest fear is that this is the month that Patreon goes away. that all those people who have been supporting me for well over 2 years now are all going to either it's going to be revealed that they're all pretend or fraudulent, or they're all going to say, nah, I've had enough of this guy and walk away or something. It's one of those nightmares that I'm going to wake up on the first day of the month. And of course, the first thing I do is go over there to Patreon, and my fear is that it's just going to go away. And that once again, I'm going to have to reinvent myself or reinvent the business model that I've been working on. And it's something that I guess shouldn't scare me, but it certainly does, because as you guys both know, how many different times have we reinvented this thing that we do, or made a major adjustment to our business model, or rethought who we were as artists? I know, just looking back over the last 18 years, it's happened a lot for me, and I do not. I like it just the way it is right now. And I don't want to reinvent anymore for a little while. I'm just figuring this one out. This is just fine.
Yeah, Grandpa's found his comfy chair. Don't make Grandpa move out of his comfy chair.
And I know deep in my heart that if and when it happens, that I will, once again reinvent, or once again make an adjustment, or find that new thing that works. It's what we do. But oh God, I don't want to do it this month, and next month is not on the table either.
Well, and one of the things that, in talking about deepest, darkest fears, that I would like to do is I kind of want to deconstruct these like we would a dream, to get to the fear behind the fear, if that makes sense. Because the thing is, if you don't acknowledge your fears in your heart, you're missing out on a quiet driver of some of the actions in your life. Because we are all driven by inspiration. We're all driven by positive words. We're all driven by our support network. But there is a not insignificant part of our brain and our actions that takes movement from our fears. And so, Brad, with yours, I think, like, to get behind it, your fear is the external, right? It's that you're doing everything you can as a cartoonist, and something else, something in the world is basically saying to you, no, all your best efforts are not working. You have to figure out something different. Is that an accurate way to describe your fear behind your fear?
It's also why I was on the phone to my representation in Congress repeatedly while they were pushing the tax bill through, because that's another one of those external things that can come around and make it very difficult for someone like me to make a living. Yeah, absolutely. It's external. I'm doing, I'm doing everything I can. I'm doing it the best way I know how, and it's working. Now, you guys don't fuck this up.
You're like, I have gotten my job as a chicken walker. Do not take my chicken away from me.
Yeah, and I guess that makes me more of a control freak than I'm willing to admit, because it really bothers me that there are external factors that can completely derail me. Stuff that I have no control over, that can completely upend the apple cart.
Well, no, and I don't want to invalidate that, because I think there's value to that, because all of us in some ways are self-driven actors. We are the prime movers of our career. And so I think that there's complete validity to that, because when you have found a modicum of success by being the prime mover of your career, by being your self-editor, by being your self-motivating project generator, it's terrifying that there is an external which could come in and, like a big Monty Python foot squishing it down, go, nope. Not going to happen. Yeah, exactly. So if it's okay with you, Brad, I want to move on to Jake's. Jake, what is your deepest, darkest fear for your career?
Yeah, so I mean, I have that fear that Brad has as well. But another fear of mine is at some point not being relevant. My work is super dated, that whether it's the story or whether it's the style, and that it just doesn't. It's just not appealing to what people want to see, whether it's the content or it's the way that I draw. And I'm worried too that I really can't. I'm having a hard time keeping up with what's politically correct and what isn't, because I feel like that's shifting, and I'm worried that I'm going to put something in there which I think is all right, but somebody clearly thinks is wrong, and then I'm screwed.
Yeah, I totally get that.
No, I can absolutely see that. Yeah. So I think what's fascinating about the fear behind your fear is that, again, it's an external, which I wonder if, because mine is external as well, and I'm wondering if that speaks to, I actually don't know what that speaks to, but that all of our fears are basically something that we cannot control.
Yeah.
That in Jake's fear, and I think we can all relate to this fear because we've all seen like Silver Age Marvel or DC artists who can't find work anymore because they're doing everything right. If anything, they're at the top of their game. But at a certain point, someone said, "No, I'd rather hire Liefeld to draw this. We don't need you anymore."
Well, I sat next to Alex Saviuk at a Wizard World way back in the day. This may go back as far as like 2009 or so. And we got talking. He's a tremendously nice guy and a amazing artist. And, that was his story. In the 80s, he was one of the top artists. He was one of the go-to guys for Spider-Man, their flagship creation. And and then he left for a little while because he could make better money for him and his family in advertising. And then when that started to bottom out, he decided, well, I'll come back to comics. Only by that time, Marvel was in this whole phase of they wanted everything to kind of look like manga. Do you remember that? Remember how the Fantastic Four particularly really shifted? And he was having trouble getting people from Marvel to take him seriously because he had that style that was so identified with something that Marvel wanted to pivot from. So he had to, make something else up. He went and found another project to work on. But if you see this guy's art, there's no his draftspersonship, his ability to just draw his butt off is among the top in the craft.
Right. But Jake's fear is still totally valid, and valid. Even though that is not top of mind for me, I completely see why that could be the case for you, and I validate you, Jack. But here's the thing, though, is that I say this as a friend, is that one of the things I see in your work, Jake, that I think maybe comes as a springboard from that fear, is that I see you constantly trying to reinvent your style and to try new things and new mediums. So. I guess if we're trying to find a silver lining here in relating to that fear, is that it has caused you to continually go back to stage one and saying, you know what, I'm going to try an entirely new pen for a month. I'm going to try an entirely new style for a month. And I've seen you do that on both in person and on the web. And it's so if anything, there's a silver lining to that fear for you.
Well, I think that's because of that fear. I'm doing those things, and I'm always looking at artists who are like relevancy proof or what irrelevancy proof, I guess. And a few artists come to mind. Like I feel like Mike Mignola has carved out such a unique style that I even look at stuff Hellboy that's 20 years old and it still feels like fresh,
right.
And his style has evolved over the years, and I think that's great too. Like it's still signaturely him, but it's different from 20 years ago as well. And so I look to him as like, all right, he's doing something right. And he's taking, he hasn't rested. He's still evolving. He's still working. How can I apply that to myself? And it might be that I find a new artist, somebody who's breaking new ground with their style. And I see, what can I crib from that, and kind of consume and apply to what I'm doing to just give my stuff a little bit more of an edge or some uniqueness. So I think there's that. And then as far as like the story front too, I just am still trying to learn. Like, I feel like I'm never going to be great at story, like to the point where I'm I guess operating on the level of the people that I'm studying. And so, and I'm fine with that, but just as long as I'm better than the Jake that wrote a story, 2 years ago, that at least this next story is better than the last one. And these characters are a little bit more believable than the last one. And the content is something that people can relate to. So that I'm trying to work on those things. And it's my worry is that, it gets a yawn and it gets, it just doesn't, whatever you're creating, Jake, does not apply to me right now.
Yeah, like the fear being like, oh yeah, Jake was a great artist in the teens, but now that it's the 2030s, but like that's not an impossible statement. Like Jake was great in the teens, but the world has moved on in 2030, and it's a different world now. Because I like having been, I so rarely talk about it, but I did a lot of work with comics history in graduate school level. And the fascinating thing about looking at cartooning from a bird's eye view, like 100 years on, like I was studying at one point British comics of the 1910s and 20s. And you and Brad and I in this conversation, we all think, oh yeah, we all have very distinctive styles. But the thing is, from 100 years on, our three very different styles, they'll be able to place when we worked. And they'll all go, oh yeah, that was somewhere between 2000 and 2020. Just seeing our style. Like, so we all think we're doing really distinctive work, just like they were in the 20s and 30s. But 100 years out, they'll go, oh yeah, that was definitely of that time. You can, and so it's an interesting puzzle of like, to make yourself feel new and inventive. How do you truly break out of your era? And maybe that's a whole topic for another day. But that's not an invalid fear at all, though, Jake. Is that the times might pass you by. But like I said, I think it's been a net positive for your career because it's been a driver of action, which is great. So let's talk about the second one for a second. So your other fear is
now listen.
Okay.
I've bared my soul. Jake over there has bared his soul. Dave Kellen, what are you scared of?
Oh, I'm scared of Brad interrupting me, and then
then it's time to face that fear because it's going to happen for the rest of the day, buddy.
Oh man! So my deepest fear is like you two is an external, and it's very specific and it's kind of grotesque. My fear is that I will crush my drawing. That is my fear, and it's a weird one to have. But I will somehow either break my 3 active fingers or hurt my hand somehow by doing some job around the house, fall off a ladder. My dad was a surgeon and fell off. He was a brilliant surgeon and also an idiot in every true guy sense, in that he was working on the roof and fell off the roof and shattered his operating arm in 4 places.
Whoa.
And for 2 years couldn't operate. And thankfully, because he was a doctor, some of the best doctors in the country repaired his arm in a way that was amazing.
I thought you were going to say, and he went on this personal self journey to the Middle East and learned magic.
What is it? The ancient one taught him. Brad, you know.
You had it exactly right. It's the ancient one.
Oh, was it the ancient one? Oh, right, yeah. The ancient one, as played by a white woman.
A revised ancient one.
Yeah, that's right. But that was kind of a singularly terrifying moment in my life because I saw a man who was great at his career, who was doing what he loved, and because of literally a slip, couldn't work for 2 years and was actively thinking, well, I guess I go teach medicine now. I guess that's my job now. I can't be a doctor anymore. So for me, because I'd like to think that I am a humble person, but I'm at my deepest, I'm probably also egotistical in the sense that if there is a problem, I will out hustle the problem. I know that if, like Brad said, I have a fear that I have to reinvent my career, but if I had to, as is true with you two, we could do it. Within 6 months, we would do a 180 on our career and we would figure out some other system. Right. But for me, the fear of crushing my drawing hand is that there is an external action that is so great that even my hustle can't fix it.
You know about Frazetta?
No, did Frazetta hurt his hand?
He had a stroke and lost the use of the right side of his body. So he learned how to paint with his left hand. And many of his works were done after the stroke and they look just as beautiful. He just trained himself to paint with his left hand. So I feel like this fear is surmountable for you. What you should be worried about is hitting your head.
That's a good point.
You can't even.
Oh, Jake, you know what, Jake? I really have to thank you for helping me not sleep tonight. Great. That's a great. I feel like as a solution, this has been great for my fear, Jake. You've replaced my fear with a greater fear.
Now you've got two things to worry about, your hand and your head. So what happens? Do you protect your head with your hand, or do you protect your hand with your head?
Yeah, quick, get a foot up there. Get it up there. So, cartoonist, pro tip, if you're headed towards a car crash, get your foot up there.
Yeah.
Get it right in the way.
My advice is just stay inside.
Way ahead of you on that one.
So unlike Lucy Bellwood, our adventure cartoonist interview from a few weeks, our advice is sit very quiet and still. Don't go anywhere.
Right. No tall ships for you.
Yeah, exactly. No running, no jogging. Don't do anything. No, you're not wrong. I mean, that's the same thing happened with Monet, didn't it? Is that one of the reasons why his style became more and more abstract is that he was losing his vision, wasn't it? And so his colors became, if anything, more fascinating and unique because he could only focus on color, not on shape. Am I misremembering that?
It has the ring of truth. In other words, if it's a total bullshit story, it's a really good one.
It's truthy, if not truthful. Great. So, well, we've all examined our deepest, darkest fears. I think that's great. And so now I want to ask Jake, because this actually leads into one of your fears, I think, is that you just posted on Insta, as the kids say, on Instagram, and on the various Twitters and websites. You posted a video of you flipping through, I think it was 129 inked pages of your graphic novel, Skyheart?
126.
126. I can do math.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
No, it was good.
100. No, because folio, that makes sense because folios are what?
It has to be divisible by 8.
By 8. Yeah, but 127. Well, anyway. Yes. All right. Good job. 3 mathematicians do a podcast. That's great. So you just finished a huge project. It's 2 years of work, of worrying, of slaving, of getting excited, of redoing pages, of inking, of starting over, of moving on. And now it's done, ostensibly. There's just coloring left to do, but it's done. That part is physically done.
Right.
And this leads to a topic I want to talk to both of you about because it's fascinating. And the idea is this. You just finished a huge project.
Yeah.
Now what?
Yes. So that is...
What do you do next?
That's a good question. Actually, that's something I wanted to take to you guys for advice. Just, I want to hear...
All right.
Yeah, I want to hear your perspective.
Just get my opinion before I crush my head, Jake. That's the one thing. And then I'll have to go be a chicken walker in Kansas.
First off, this project was kickstarted, and I did something that I do not recommend anybody do, and that is I went to Kickstarter and I said I have an idea, and I pitched my idea, and I said I haven't drawn it yet, but I want the money, the money up front, so that I have. So I could devote time to drawing this and say no to freelance, so I could say yes to this project. And 2,000 people backed me. It came in at I think $100,000, on up front. I ended up getting 90,000 after credit card transactions failed and the fees, the percentages, right? So I have all that money sitting there, which then is taxed upon. And then when you figure out printing costs, shipping costs, it whittles down to maybe about $30,000 to actually work on the book, which then took me what I hoped was a year. It ended up taking 2.5 years to write the story, draw everything for it, and about 2 years to just get that far. And the whole time, I felt like I couldn't show this to anybody because I didn't want to spoil it for my backers, and I couldn't put it on Patreon and make money off of it on Patreon as well because that wouldn't be fair to the backers. I felt like my hands were tied this whole time, and I had to kind of keep it under wraps because it was this project that I made for these Kickstarter backers, and I felt like had I just buckled down for the last 2 years and figured out a way to do it, I could have been sharing, selling off bits of this at a time, whether it's on Patreon or digital downloads or things like that. And and grow an audience for it that way instead of, I guess, leveraging the audience that I already had. So I guess long story short with the Kickstarter thing, if you're planning on doing a Kickstarter, finish the work first and then kickstart for the printing of it. Don't kickstart the production of it, I guess.
I have to say, and as a friend, I look at hindsight being 2020. I don't know that I would have had the savvy to do it differently at the time, but looking back on it, I think you are correct. I think basically what you did in doing the work first, you're basically front loading the pain and the reward at the end. And when you kickstart it first, you're doing the reverse, and there's an odd emotional denouement when you do it that way. You're like, oh, look at this, all this money, all this support. Oh, now I have to look at 126 blank pieces of paper and do this for the next 2 years.
It's like waking up the next morning after a wild party and thinking, "Oh my God, that was a lot of fun. Now what? You know what? Now I've got to deal with all that stuff that I said last night."
But I gotta say, in the way that we're constantly watching each other and seeing what experiments work, when you did it at the time, I was like, "Hey, bully for Jake! He made 100,000 plus. He got all the support. He's basically subsidized doing a comic." But now looking back on it, and especially seeing what Patreon is able to do, or even what like small, like you said, digital PDF sales could have done to grow the audience or a website. You uploading a page of Skyheart every week or two to a website or to Patreon, you would have timed out right about 2 years as well doing it that way, and maybe have grown the audience and maybe have ended up making more income. So it's I can't say that I disagree with you on that. But
that said, though, I still have been sharing stuff along the way, and there are people who missed the Kickstarter who are like, "Hey, how do I get in on this? Is there still a chance to get this book?" So in the next, probably by the time this podcast airs, I'll have pre-orders set up for this book so I can get a second wave of people who want to pre-order the book, which should be, it should be good. I have 1,600 email signups on the Skyheart page of people saying, let me know when the book goes on sale.
But from a business aspect, though, if you're listening to this podcast thinking about doing this from a business aspect, you've taken on a considerable risk and a lot of extra problems because, like you said, that money got taxed that year that you made it. And you didn't have any expenses to speak of that you could deduct. So the full amount got taxed, right? And
Well, I deferred it. I did. There was a thing we did with my accountant that said, okay, we can defer these taxes till next year. But so I ended up having to pay them not on that year, but on the next year. Still, I paid taxes on them.
So granted, you deferred it, but you still didn't have any deductions.
And can I tell you, Brad, because this is also true, I Kickstarted my Drive book and it ended up clearing, I don't know, November or December, the Kickstarter funds. Guess when the print run happened? The next year. And I was like, oh, you idiot. Why did you do it this way? I was like, no, I needed that $20,000 deduction, you dummy. Why did you?
And plus, now you've got to be disciplined and smart enough that you don't mistakenly spend some of that money, that on stuff that you're going to need to cover later, which is something that you hear time and time again when people do Kickstarters. That's the big problem. They dig themselves into a hole because, of course, extra costs as last minute things come up. Things come through more expensive than they had estimated, particularly shipping, and they spent their Kickstarter money too soon. So what you did, I knowing you as I do, I know you're going to be able to pull this off. But man, if you're listening to this podcast, and I think you'd agree, this is not advisable, right?
Right. Yeah, do the work first.
But that being said, I remember you at that point in your life. I think we talked about it over breakfast at a Comic-Con one time, and you were saying how you needed an viable economic way to be able to say to you, your wife, that like, hey, this is a reason to step away from freelance work. This is a reason to devote towards it. And so you basically needed permission.
Right.
And I get that. I 100% get that.
Right.
So I understand why you made the decision at the time.
Had I not launched the Kickstarter, I don't know that 126 pages of Skyheart would be drawn right now today.
No.
So,
well, here's what would have happened. It would have taken you, and this is honestly 3 to 4 years to do it. And what would have happened then is in the 3 to 4 years, you would have had, because it hadn't seen print yet, you would have then looked at the first 20 pages and gone, yeah, you know what? Yep. I can do better. And then you would have redrawn the first 20 pages. And then, like, you know what I mean? That would have, so in a way, this forced your hand to get it done, because you were also, Brad, the biggest deferred payment that Jake also had was guilt. When you have 2 years of a Kickstarter of people waiting, I know, Jake, you must have had that on your heart. You're like, I'm so sorry, everyone. Oh God, this is terrible. This takes me 2 years.
Yeah.
And that's a miserable feeling to have for 2 years.
Right.
Is to swim in that.
I've had 3 people say, you know what, this is ridiculous, Jake, give me my money back. Everyone else has said,
oh, so you got my email then. Okay, good.
Everyone else has either been silent or has said, you know, I back this project. I know these things happen. Take your time to make it good, but please get it to me as soon as you can.
And here's the thing: those 3 jerks would have been jerks no matter what you did. I can assure you of that. Those are unhappy people. But the thing is, in your artist heart, just as is true with Brad and I, even if no one had said anything, even if you had only gotten support, I know you would have still felt guilt, because that's the artist's way to feel guilty about it. But so the bigger picture that I wanted to get at with both of you, though, because I think this is a fascinating topic, though, is that you've devoted 2 years of your life to this project. But now emotionally, separate from the financial considerations and separate from the logistics of a project, how do you emotionally go on to the next thing?
Yeah, so actually, the story of Skyheart isn't over yet. The story of the book isn't over, and then the story in the book isn't over. So the thing that I've written is chapter 1, right? And there's still more story to do, and it ends on a nice cliffhanger. Like I've got all my main characters in play, and you're like, what's next, right? So I also have a literary agent, and she is fielding like questions from editors like, hey, what's going on with Jake and Skyheart? So there's interest there to publish it traditionally. But that comes with all of these caveats and problems and things where I could play that game and I could do that thing, but like right now in my gut, I'm feeling like I want to do this book as an online like comic, as a thing that I'm just doing on my own without the pressure. I guess without the publishing pressure. And the publishing pressure isn't bad pressure; it's good pressure. But
for people that aren't familiar with it, because I don't know that they would know, what is the pressure that you're feeling in your heart if you go that route?
So there's some legitimate concerns with how it's already done, and that is the publishing world. There's exceptions to this rule, but the publishing world wants fresh, new, unpublished content, and Skyheart has been published, and to a certain percentage of an audience, it's not new and it's not fresh. It's something that I've done, and now it's being repackaged and published now through a publisher. So in my agent's eyes and in publisher's eyes, they want something new and fresh. That said, they have published Kickstarter, things that have gone through the Kickstarter circuit, and they've done well with that for the most part. There's that. The other thing too is I've illustrated this book in a traditional comics format, the size. And the publishers that I've all worked with in the past and who would be interested in this print at a digest size, which is a different dimension. It's smaller. So there would be some format changes. So if I say yes to a publisher, now it's possibly changing the story or using the same characters in the same world and taking it to a different story into a different world, not a different world, but having a different adventure with these characters so that it's new and it's fresh. Changing the size of it and And then also, you're working with an editor, which is good, and which I'm seriously thinking about hiring a freelance editor to work with me, because I need a person to bounce things off of that will take the time to actually, like, I always feel bad like sharing it with friends and like, you read this and just tell me what you think, because now that's asking a favor, and you don't want to like put them out, but you really need that. So I like working with an editor or with someone who just has those kind of things in mind. So regardless, moving forward, if I go with a publisher, if I self-publish or do the online route, I'm going to be hiring somebody to help me with story and dialogue and those kinds of things. Just make sure everything like is reading good. So there's these two avenues, right? And the publishing thing, also publishing, you can get an advance, but the advance that they're paying for comics now, I don't know is going to be any better than what I might do online.
Yeah, I think we don't need to talk specifics, but for the broader world, I think the advances in the YA market are in the low tens of thousands, right? Isn't that ballparking it?
Yeah, well, I mean, because I've been in publishing and I think starting out, yes, it's going to be in the teens. Maybe for a graphic novel you might get 20,000, but I'm operating at a little bit higher level now, so I can expect a little bit more from my advance, but still at the end of the day, it's not. I don't think it's not gonna cover all my bills. I'm still gonna have to take on side work and other things to like. It's not full time this. So if I'm not doing full time, anyway, I might as well be publishing it. And then this is I'm sorry, I'm not being like super clear, but there's just so many things to like talk about.
Well, imagine us sitting in a chair across from you, holding your hand. We're patting the top of your hand.
I know.
It's all going to be okay.
I know.
No, I mean, I'll be honest with you, because I was talking with Brad briefly about Skyheart before we got on with you, and it's an interesting question, because in most cases, Brad and I think, Brad, I can speak for you on this, we would advocate like, no, own your own career, control it yourself, put as much of it as you can online. You will do well to own and control your audience, all that sort of thing. But I actually feel, and this might be from a point of ignorance, but I think not, that the YA market is an interesting exception to the rule because that is a market that the book still rules the world. And in the sense that a 12-year-old may not have internet access from mom and dad, or if they do, it's maybe just for homework or for limited things. And so it maybe is unfortunate, but that is still a world that Scholastic has mastery over. And if there's even a chance to get Skyheart in that, I might go for it myself if I were you. I don't know.
Well, here's my other issue with the publishing world, and that is the glacial pace that it operates.
Oh, that's murder. Right. Like if you were to sell it today to Scholastic, we would see it in what, 2020 at this point?
Okay, so yeah, if I were to sign a deal today, it would probably take, well, first off, the contract stuff usually takes months, right? So once that's all done, then I would probably have about a year and a half to work on the actual book, the book one. And it would probably be a 1 or 2 or 3 book deal because of the length of the story. But let's say it's just a 1 book deal. It would take a year and a half to finish that story. Then it takes another year to sell the book to all the book buyers, so they know how many they're going to print. So Amazon says we'll take 2,000 copies. Barnes and Noble says we'll take 3,000 or 10,000 copies. Then you have every other buyer that does books, the smaller bookstores or the people that distribute to the smaller bookstores. So once they know that, then they know, okay, we can print 30, 40,000 copies and sell the rest of these off because we have pre-orders on these, and sell the rest of these off as we get the marketing machine going after the book comes out, right? So all of that takes another year. So you're looking at 2 or 3 years, 2.5 years before this book actually is on bookshelves, right? And I know for me, in the way that I work, I really like feedback sooner than that. I don't want to put something, work on something, have it come out 2 years later, then get the feedback and realize, okay, is this resonating with the people? Is this working? And so for me, like right now, I'm feeling like, okay, let's put it out in 20-page segments on the internet, get the feedback, get the audience built, grow this story like that, and see how that does and where that goes, because it's going to take a while to make anyway. It's going to have to be a side project anyway, so it might as well be continually like dripping money into me all along the way.
Well, let's turn this to Brad. I want to hear your thoughts. What would you do in this situation? How would you approach this?
Well, in Jake's situation specifically?
Yeah. Because this is a good one to, like, Jake is specifically doing what you asked for last week, which is like, here's a possible answer to my problem.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. It helps to kind of frame this a certain way, and that is that there's two ways of looking at this, and it's really coming into focus as Jake's talking. The way you and I have done publishing, the book is not the thing. The book is a record of the thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. And the way Jake is going about this, the book is the thing. And so there's pros and cons to both of those, but it helps to kind of it helps your own decision making once you realize which one of those that you're in. In other words, for me, I'm going to be doing comics. I'm putting them on Patreon. I'm putting them on a website. I'm getting paid for them in advance. At the end of the year, I'm collecting them, and the book is a record of the thing. For Jake, the book is more the thing. So once you have that kind of set in your mind and you know what you're dealing with, I think you can make your decisions a whole lot more clear. I don't know that I would do anything a whole lot different than what he's doing, other than I don't know that I would be necessarily tripping over myself to get that contract from Scholastic and in any other case than if they're going to take something that I'm already done and buy that and move it. Because what you're describing to me, you're going to be spinning your wheels trying to get that thing done under their specs and using their process, and the rest of your business, the rest of your life is going to suffer. So I could certainly understand, if not this Skyheart, maybe the next one, or a special offshoot that you produce that's tailor-made for Scholastic to pick it up. If it were me, I would take that risk, make that thing, and even if Scholastic says, well, we'd rather want fresh, we'd rather want this, we'd rather want that, that's fine. If they don't bite on it, and if the next publisher doesn't bite on it, or what have you, you still have your ability to put that thing out on your own, kickstart it, make your money, and all of that. I don't know that I would jump through hoops trying to retrofit for Scholastic. You know what I mean? I in other words, if I'm putting this under one header, I would say do your thing. And then if you, and along with kickstarting and self-publishing and everything else, and then once you have this thing, if you offer it to a publisher and they want to pick it up and distribute it wider from there, that's fine. You do need Scholastic as a distributor. You don't need them as a publisher. You see what I'm saying? So you can publish this thing on your own. Now, what Dave is saying, they are gold in terms of getting out to that young adult, that YA market. But that's more of a distributor function. And if they want to jump in on it as a distributor, that's fine. But I don't know that you need them as a publisher.
Yeah, that's true.
So I have a couple interesting thoughts on this because I'm very conflicted about which way I would recommend you go with this, Jake. But here's an interesting thought experiment, because I think we're all in admiration of what he did. You could time travel Jeff Smith from 1991 to right now. How would he do Bone right now?
He would, it'd be a webcomic.
So I think for those that don't know the back history of it, like Jeff Smith literally drove around, I think, the Midwest to comic shops with Bone in his trunk, selling Bone, black and white Bone copies to comic shops.
Yeah, I actually bought a copy off of him from his trench coat on a corner.
Wow.
In Cleveland. No.
But I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, but look at what he has now in terms of, I believe, who's now the current imprimatur of the big color Bone, the gigantic one, the Scholastic.
Yeah, that's Scholastic.
Which basically just belies the bullshit of their argument that they don't want to buy already existing properties. I always find that argument ridiculous because look at the sale that Check Please just had for its webcomic run and how successful that's going. I feel like that's a mid-level editor going, no, I just want to own it and control the thing that I brought to the market. I'm going to build my career by saying I'm the one that created Skyheart and I'm going to move up Scholastic, Honestly, I feel like there's a 30 to 40-year-old editor that's like, no, I'm bringing original things to the market that only I have seen before.
They're hanging their hat on that.
When in fact, to Brad's longstanding point, you have a project like Check Please or Bone or Skyheart that is market tested online and resonates. That's bullshit that you don't want to bring that to the book market. That is absolute bullshit. I feel like that's a weird, if nothing else, it's a blind spot on their part to not see what market testing is getting them online. So anyway, that being said, I personally feel like a 20s Jeff Smith now with Bone would be making it as a webcomic or somehow digitally distributing it and then building it up so that 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, he could sell the completed version to Scholastic. That's what I honestly feel like that's what he'd be doing. And I'm in great admiration of what he did with Bone, and I think that's gonna long outlive all of our careers. People will be reading that 100 years from now. And he did it through the sweat and control of owning his own career. And I think that there is a lesson to be learned for you with Skyheart with that. But it's hard because I'm also of a mind that the YA market is different. I'm very aware that 9 to 13-year-olds are not necessarily surfing the web for new content. You know what I mean? They're still going to the Scholastic Book Fair and they're still going to their school library. And
that's the thing is I could do the direct market. I could take it to Image if I didn't mind like chopping heads off, in each issue or, just maturing it up a little bit, because that's also an option for a creator today is like, you can do an Image book and take your audience to there. I've seen a handful of guys do a good job with that.
What's really the advantage there? I'm not sure that I understand what the advantage is for taking it to like an Image or something like that. I don't know that comic shop sales are that brisk, are that strong. I'm not sold on that.
I think it depends on the book, and if you have a book that reaches that Image audience, and I think if you also have a little bit of a name that you've built up with in the comic community, you could do really well.
Yeah, I would agree with Jake on that. That I think if he could own Skyheart's presence online and have Image help expand its potential readership, I think there's value there.
I'll tell you what, I disagree with both of you here, and here's and I may be full of shit. It wouldn't be the first time. You take that same Skyheart, all right, and you publish it, and you've got it set up, ready to go. You put that out not as a floppy, but as a graphic novel. Put it out through a distributor like Diamond, all right, but in book, or you can also, there's other book distributors, right? But the main thing is once you get it out there at the distributor level, that lands you on Amazon. And that's where all your sales are going to happen, not the comic shop, but Amazon. And what you need is that distributor to have a warehouse full of your books so that once that thing does start cranking away on Amazon, it takes off on its own and you don't have to sit there and package up books and stuff like that. If I had my choice between the two of those, I would certainly do it that second way as opposed to putting these things out as a floppy through Image, or even having Image publish your graphic novel and haven't yet, because now you've got another person with their hand in the process. So now you're cutting a check or giving profits to Image and the distributor and Amazon, which is as opposed to just doing it with the distributor and Amazon. I think that you'd have. I don't buy that there's that big of a market there that Image is going to get you to that you can't get on your own. And the real game is on Amazon.
Well, Brad,
Right.
I'm not discounting what you're saying. I think there's a lot of value there for other projects. But here's where I'll disagree with you is that how does a YA reader, how does a 12-year-old know to even look on Amazon for Skyheart in that scenario? Like, how did they come across
Now we're
it?
shifting around here because Image isn't going to get you the YA audience either.
That's right. Well, that's what I was saying. If I go through Image, I have to mature it up.
So if we're bringing this back to the YA conversation, again, I'm going to go back to that initial thing I said where you kickstart it, you publish it, you make your money, you have some left over, and then you are approaching like a Scholastic or whichever with a finished product, and you treat them not as a publisher, but as a distributor of your market-tested product.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to put a stick in the ground as to where I would do it. I would do. What is a stick in the ground? I don't know what I just said. But
a flag in the sand.
A flag in the sand. Yeah. So I
go.
think a version of what Brad just said is what I would do. Here's what I would do at this point. I would continue to. So book one is done. It's drawn. You've made the money to get it out there. Sell the additional copies to the 1,600 people you have on your webcomics. Sell an additional 500 to 1,000 over the next couple of years to people as they come to discover it and pass it around. Right? So that's the pattern there. Book two, I think it goes up on Patreon to those now 4,000 to 5,000 people that loved book one. You're making money consistently on it. You then kickstart the book when it's about 3/4 finished, or 4/5 finished. You sell it again on Kickstarter. You repeat the same pattern, and then I think it's probably going to be a 3 to 7 book arc. Am I guessing right on that? I haven't asked you about that.
3 to 4.
So then you repeat the same cycle for book 3 and 4, and then I would chime in agreement with Brad is then you take that complete book, which is now going to be probably about 500 pages, and you say, look at this, Scholastic. It's a unique formatted, agreed, but it's a fantastic 500 YA graphic novel. Let's talk. And so in the meantime, you've made a few $100,000 in those intervening 5 years from different sources, and maybe even up to upwards of $500,000 over 5 years of making those 3 to 4 books. And that's the way I would do it. I would do it that way.
Jake, we've just figured out your career for you. Now all you got to do is go out and do it. We left the easy part to you.
All right, now guys, we're turning to the growth on my back. All right, now what do I do about it? How do I go see a doctor?
It's like an angry mole, Dave.
We need to figure this out. No, but I honestly think that's the way I would do it at this point, Jake. I think that's a version of what a 1991 Jeff Smith would do, and I think that's what I would do, and I think that's what Brad would do too.
Now let me throw a little something in there for you. What happens if let's say it's a four book set, and you do what Dave said for the first 3 books, but as you're gaining steam over the years, you are actually working on that 4th book, but not posting it. And then by the time you come to a Scholastic or similar, you say, I've got these 3 books. It's really great. The 4th book caps it off. I haven't published any of the 4th book yet. We put this out as one big thing. The 4th book is all new material that no one has seen anywhere. And the book itself is a collection from book 1 through 4. And you offer them that, which is maybe a little bit of a taste of both worlds. They get the market tested 1 through 3, and they get the fact that book 4 is all new material, and they get the fact that this is the only way that you can buy the entire story from start to finish.
That's not a bad idea.
You know what, Brad? I've had that exact same idea with Drive for the 3rd act. I'm not kidding. There's a big box set, and it's only available through a publisher. Because by that point, I've maximized my money through Patreon and Kickstarter for what I could get out of Drive. And then an alternate version that I've thought about, and Jake, you could think about this too for Skyheart. With Drive, my grand ambition is I kickstart book 1. I'm doing Patreon in the meantime. I kickstart book 2. I Patreon in the meantime. Kickstart book 3. Great. Oh, the story is done. But now I kickstart a super huge box set with an additional short story by me, a couple of additional guest stories by other people, and then you're getting the entire market that you've already sold to, probably again, frankly, because it's going to be this beautiful leather-bound, gorgeous book. Well,
I have every version of Hellboy that's ever been published.
And sometimes when you buy in big as a comics reader.
Absolutely.
One of my favorite things is seeing, to go back to Image, like with Invincible, they have the floppies, then they have the Invincible semi floppies, whatever those are called, soft covers, and then those
trades.
and then those become the slightly bigger one, and those become the unmissable Invincible, and then that one gets combined again to become the super unmissable Invincible, whatever. And like
Invincible phone book.
Yeah, exactly. And so by the time you're done as a Image fan of Walking Dead or Invincible or one of these, you've ended up buying 19 different books of the same book. So,
well, it's what we said way back, going back to Webcomics Weekly. That was our credo as web cartoonists: do it once and get paid for it as often as you can.
Yeah, no. So I think we did. I think we helped a life here today, Brad.
I think we've done good. I think we've done good.
No, I do have clarity.
If you can send some of that my way, I'd appreciate it. I'm still looking for that.
So now my one big pro tip to you, Jake, is just don't crush your drawing hand now.
Yeah,
That's just to bring it full circle. I don't crush your drawing hand.
Actually, can I plug the Skyheart website while I'm here?
Sure. Now that you're nervous about how you're going to do this.
No, go to skyheartcomic.com. That's where I'm posting every updates. You can sign up for the email so you get notified when I launch the pre-order. So that's if this has piqued any interest in you, just go to skyheartcomic.com.
And you know what? Let's all help Jake not wet his pants in this moment.
Yes.
So sign.
Please.
Only you can save a child at this moment.
You've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice, patreon.com/comiclab. Hey, if you have a little bit of time, head on over to iTunes, give us a 5-star review. Doesn't cost you a thing, but it helps us get this show out to more and more people.
Oh, and for those that were waiting for it, I finally posted my studio pictures. They're real estate ready for the staging of the house, and so it's the most beautiful, clean shot of my studio that will ever have existed.
My heart aches for you. That's such a beautiful space. It is, but I know the new space is going to be just as gorgeous.
It won't, but thank you, Brad, for saying that.
We're going to keel haul Jake in and make sure that he joins us, but we've been doing a fantastic job of getting those pro tips episodes out, and we're going to have Jake over helping us out with a pro tip in a little bit here. But if you are a Patreon backer, you get all kinds of extras: the studio tours, the pro tips episodes. We're giving you every excuse you might need to be a Patreon backer.